At 1447 local time, beneath clear skies and over calm waters in the southern Caribbean, a U.S. Navy carrier strike group moved steadily through international waters. There were no drills underway, no urgent alerts, just a routine transit. Flight operations were on schedule, escort ships held their standard positions, and sensors swept the horizon the way they always do. Then the situation shifted. Inside the Combat Information Center, surface search displays lit up with 6 contacts appearing almost at once. They were small, fast naval vessels approaching the outer edge of the carrier's protective screen from the west. At first, their bearings were spread out and their speeds varied. But within seconds, the pattern became clear. All 6 accelerated together. That kind of synchronization is never random. The track supervisor called it immediately. Bearings, speeds, and closest point of approach calculations updated in real time. Based on hull shape and emissions history, the contacts were identified as Venezuelan naval ships. They were not broadcasting their intentions. They were not answering standard maritime traffic calls. And they were closing on a U.S. carrier formation operating fully within international law. On the bridge, the officer of the deck acknowledged the report in a steady voice. No alarms, no sudden movements, no visible shift in posture. The order was straightforward: maintain course and speed. At that moment, it still was not a crisis. Not yet. Carrier strike groups are designed to handle situations exactly like this. A layered screen of destroyers and cruisers protects the carrier, and every platform shares the same tactical picture, extending far beyond the horizon. Radar, electronic surveillance, and optical tracking all feed into one common view. When 6 ships begin moving in concert, that picture becomes impossible to misread. At 1451, the Venezuelan ships changed formation. What had started as a loose approach compressed into a shallow arc, angled toward the carrier's projected path. It was a familiar kind of move, enough pressure to be noticed, but not enough to clearly cross a legal boundary. Close enough to send a message, not close enough to justify a direct response. Inside CIC, the rules of engagement were reviewed quietly and methodically. Warn, record, show presence. The escalation ladder was understood, and nobody was eager to climb it. Bridge-to-bridge calls went out in English, then in Spanish. No reply. The carrier did not slow down. The escorts did not break formation. Helicopter crews remained on standby, rotors still. From the outside, the scene looked almost uneventful. Inside the command spaces, every second was being documented. Course changes, speed increases, radar behavior, radio silence, all of it recorded. The U.S. Navy does not rely on guesswork. It builds a record. At 1456, closest point of approach calculations tightened again. One Venezuelan ship surged briefly ahead of the others, pushing beyond the speed of the formation before easing back. Another moved laterally, testing the edge of the screen. It was a carefully staged display meant to project confidence and control. What it really revealed was intent. The carrier's escorts adjusted their spacing, not dramatically, but just enough to preserve the formation's geometry. Fire control systems remained inactive. Electronic warfare teams listened closely, collecting emissions with exacting precision. Above the group, maritime patrol aircraft held position out of sight, extending the surveillance picture far beyond what the surface ships alone could see. This was not a simple show of strength. It was observation from both sides. By 1500, the Venezuelan formation had fully committed. 6 naval vessels were now clearly maneuvering to hem in the strike group's projected track, trying to force a deviation without ever making a formal demand. It was a calculated gamble. Create pressure, generate attention, avoid immediate consequences. But pressure works both ways. Every maneuver was time-stamped, every signal was captured, every unsafe angle of approach was preserved through high-resolution optics. What the Venezuelan commanders may have seen as a bold display of presence was, in reality, a data-rich encounter unfolding under constant observation. And the strike group kept moving. No warning shots, no visible shift in posture. Just steel holding its line, aircraft continuing their cycle, and a command team allowing the moment to unfold because experience had taught them something essential. In encounters like this, the first side to lose composure rarely comes out ahead. The 6 Venezuelan ships were about to learn that lesson the hard way. By 1504 local time, the encounter had moved far beyond coincidence. The 6 Venezuelan warships were no longer acting like passing traffic. Their formation tightened, spacing narrowed, and their headings aligned not with open sea lanes, but with the projected path of the carrier strike group. This was no longer parallel movement. It was deliberate positional pressure. Inside the Combat Information Center, the surface picture refreshed continuously. Speed vectors stabilized. Bearings converged. Closest point of approach projections fell below 4 nautical miles for 2 of the contacts. That figure mattered, not because it crossed a formal threshold, but because it pointed clearly to intent. The strike group commander received the update the same way everything else had been delivered, calmly and precisely. No speculation, only facts. 6 Venezuelan naval vessels, coordinated maneuvering, no response to hails, no declared exercise, no request for a course change. Command guidance remained exactly the same. Maintain course and speed. Carrier strike groups do not turn impulsively. Any shift in heading sends consequences across dozens of connected platforms, surface combatants, aircraft, support ships, all linked by timing and geometry. Altering course without a clear reason can create openings where none existed before. Here, discipline mattered more than drama. And in contested waters, any opening can invite escalation. At 15:08, the lead Venezuelan ship increased speed once more. The change was slight, but enough to move ahead of the rest of its group and drift closer to the outer defensive screen. At the same time, another vessel pressed inward from the south, tightening the lateral gap. Together, the two movements created a narrow funnel, a quiet attempt to shape the carrier's route without making an open challenge. It was a textbook example of gray zone pressure. From the bridges of the American escorts, sailors tracked hull numbers and activity on deck through binoculars. Crew members were visible aboard the Venezuelan ships, helmets on, moving near weapon mounts. They were not actively operating them, but they were far from casual. Live visual feeds flowed back to CIC, aligned with radar returns and electronic signatures. The full picture matched perfectly. At 15:12, bridge-to-bridge calls were sent again. Still nothing. That silence was intentional, and it mattered. In naval operations, radio silence is not an accident. It removes doubt about whether a message was heard and shifts responsibility for what happens next. By ignoring repeated safety calls, the Venezuelan ships were effectively accepting ownership of every move that followed. The strike group's response remained controlled and disciplined. Electronic warfare teams stayed in passive collection mode. No interference, no active countermeasures, only listening. Every radar sweep from the opposing ships was logged. Power levels, scan cycles, modes, patterns, technical details that, once captured, become part of a lasting record. Above the formation, a Seahawk helicopter was placed on immediate standby. Its rotors remained still, the crew strapped in and ready. It would launch only if necessary. Presence can be a powerful signal, but this was not yet the moment to use it. At 15:16, closest point of approach calculations shrank again. 2 Venezuelan vessels were now projected to pass inside 3 nautical miles if neither side changed course. That distance is not unlawful by itself, but when combined with speed and clear intent, it becomes hazardous. Inside CIC, the language in the reports shifted. The word contact gave way to approach. That mattered too. Language shapes decisions. The escorts made minor adjustments, preserving the integrity of the screen without advertising escalation. Fire control systems remained inactive. Weapon mounts stayed oriented fore and aft. From the outside, nothing appeared overtly threatening. From the inside, every action was precise. This is the point many provocations aim for. The moment the other side yields first. A slight course change, a symbolic ustupka, a headline that suggests pressure worked. But it never came. The carrier continued forward, cutting through the calm Caribbean as though the surrounding tension did not exist. Flight operations went on. Aircraft remained positioned on deck. The message was never spoken aloud, yet it was unmistakable. This formation would not be pushed off course. By 15:20, the Venezuelan ships had fully committed. All 6 were now maneuvering in a coordinated pattern intended to intersect the strike group's projected path within minutes. It was the closest they had come, the tightest geometry of the encounter, and the point where the risk of miscalculation was highest. Even then, the radio remained silent. What the Venezuelan commanders could not see was the broader picture closing around them. They were not trapping a carrier. They were moving deeper into a tactical environment that was being thoroughly documented, recorded, and controlled from every angle. The pressure phase had played out. Now the consequences were beginning. At 15:23 local time, the encounter crossed a quiet but meaningful threshold. One of the Venezuelan warships switched its surface search radar into active mode. It was not a fire control lock, and it was not a direct targeting action, but it was no longer passive observation either. The emission was detected immediately across the carrier strike group's electronic surveillance network. Clean, distinct, and impossible to miss. Inside the Combat Information Center, the report came without emotion. They've gone active. That single move changed the character of the entire encounter. Active emissions are deliberate. They announce presence. They reveal capability. To trained analysts, they provide a system's fingerprint. Range behavior, sweep rate, power output, signal characteristics, the way that radar interprets the battle space. What one side may view as a show of confidence can look to the other like a valuable intelligence opportunity. And still, outwardly, the strike group did not react. Course and speed did not change. From the outside, the formation looked steady and unchanged. Inside, however, the posture had shifted. Electronic warfare teams moved from routine monitoring into full-spectrum collection. Every pulse from the Venezuelan radar was captured, time-stamped, and matched against position and movement. Within seconds, clear patterns began to emerge. No countermeasures were used, no jamming. The goal was not confrontation, but precision. At 15:25, two Venezuelan ships changed speed sharply, pushing ahead of the rest in a staggered maneuver. Their wakes stretched longer, spacing tightened, and safe separation narrowed. Closest point of approach calculations became more compressed. The move was aggressive without crossing into anything overtly unlawful, calculated to create pressure and discomfort. That was the critical mistake. At sea, aggression is not judged by distance alone. It is judged by predictability. By tightening their formation while broadcasting active emissions, the Venezuelan ships made themselves completely readable. What had been a tense situation was now turning into a fully visible tactical pattern. On the carrier's bridge, the captain watched the plot update in silence. He did not order a turn. He did not call for louder warnings. He approved the next step: launch the helo. At 15:27, an MH-60 Seahawk rose from the deck of a nearby escort and climbed smoothly into the afternoon sky. There was no dramatic show of force, no aggressive movement, only a controlled and deliberate approach toward the Venezuelan formation. Its sensors went active immediately. Electro-optical systems zoomed in on bridge windows. Infrared cameras mapped engine heat and movement across the decks. Laser designation systems remained non-lethal, but they were visible, precise, and impossible to miss. The helicopter did not fly directly over the ships. It held an offset position at a safe maritime distance, signaling presence without escalating the encounter. Then came the radio call, calm, professional, and fully recorded. Venezuelan naval vessels, this is a United States Navy helicopter. You are conducting unsafe maneuvers in international waters. Alter course immediately. The message was repeated in Spanish. This time, there was a reaction. Movement appeared on the decks of the Venezuelan ships. Personnel shifted position. Binoculars came up. One vessel hesitated and its wake shortened. Another maintained speed for a moment, then edged a few degrees outward, breaking the geometry of the attempted block. Inside CIC, the effect showed up immediately. Closest point of approach values stabilized. The level of risk began to fall. But by then, the real damage had already been done. Every second of the approach, every radar emission, every speed adjustment, every unsafe maneuver had been captured across multiple platforms. Surface radar, airborne optics, electronic surveillance, time, position, and behavior were now fixed in the record. The Venezuelan commanders had intended to apply pressure without paying a price. Instead, they had created evidence. At 15:31, the active radar emissions stopped. That silence said more than the earlier radio silence ever had. One by one, the Venezuelan ships reduced speed. Their formation loosened. The shallow arc they had used to squeeze the strike group dissolved into wider, parallel tracks. The same gap they had spent the last 20 minutes trying to close was now opening again. The Seahawk stayed on station for one more pass, steady, watchful, non-threatening, before banking away and heading back to its ship. No flares, no weapons aimed, no warning shots. And through all of it, the carrier strike group never changed course. What had seemed from a distance like a bold effort to pressure a carrier ended in a quiet withdrawal. Not because of force, but because of exposure. At sea, mistakes are not always dramatic. Sometimes the biggest mistake is simply making yourself visible. By 15:34 local time, the confrontation had lost its energy. The 6 Venezuelan warships were still there, still visible on radar and through optical systems, but the geometry was different now. Speeds dropped across the formation. Headings drifted outward by a few degrees at a time. What had begun as a coordinated attempt to shape the carrier's path had become a loose, cautious, parallel movement. Inside the Combat Information Center, the change was obvious. Closest point of approach values widened. Risk indicators shifted from amber back to green. The surface picture settled into something far more familiar. Send the next part, and I'll keep going in the same style. The situation had shifted from obstruction to shadowing. The strike group commander gave no new orders because none were necessary. The carrier stayed on its original course. Flight operations continued without interruption. Aircraft kept cycling across the deck. The escorts maintained position. To anyone watching from a distance, the scene had returned to normal. Inside the formation, though, it was clear the encounter had already been decided. What came next was the aftermath. Across the strike group, systems moved into post-incident processing. Sensor logs were merged, radar tracks were aligned with visual and infrared footage. Electronic emissions were matched against known signal libraries. In less than an hour, a tense maneuver at sea had been turned into a lasting record, something that could be reviewed, studied, and revisited whenever needed. This is where modern naval capability shows its real depth. Firepower is only part of the equation. Information control matters just as much. The Venezuelan ships had pulled back without a shot being fired, but their actions left a clear trail. Their formation changes, response timing, emissions patterns, and command behavior had all been observed under pressure. Habits were noted, tendencies became visible. Any future encounter would begin with that knowledge already in hand. At 1541, the U.S. escort sent one final bridge-to-bridge transmission. It was not a warning, only a professional safety advisory reminding all vessels to maintain safe separation in international waters. No reply came back. None was needed. The Seahawk was secured on deck. Its crew went straight into debrief, handing over sensor data and annotated timelines. The sortie would likely never make headlines, and that was exactly the point. Careful documentation often carries more weight than public spectacle. For the Venezuelan commanders, the result was difficult to define. There had been no open confrontation, no obvious retreat they would need to admit, but there had also been no success. The carrier had not changed course. The strike group had not slowed. The attempted pressure campaign had ended without ever forcing a crisis. For the U.S. Navy, the result matched the objective. The encounter showed restraint without giving ground, presence without unnecessary provocation, and control without pushing the situation into escalation. That balance is never accidental. It is practiced. Carrier strike groups operate on the assumption that any close encounter can later be recorded, distorted, or turned into a political talking point. That is why procedures are strict, language is exact, and decisions are logged as they happen. The purpose is not to win the moment emotionally. The purpose is to make sure that when the event is reviewed later by commanders, allies, or international observers, the facts remain solid. By 1550, the Venezuelan ships had moved well outside any meaningful intercept pattern. They still appeared on radar, but their movements were no longer tactical. The pressure phase was over. What remained was assessment. In the hours that followed, the strike group's intelligence teams would do what they always do: break the encounter down piece by piece. Not to inflame the situation, but to be ready for the next one. Every Navy learns when it tests limits. The real difference lies in what it takes away from the experience. That day, one side was reminded that restraint should not be mistaken for weakness. The other learned that trying to pressure a carrier strike group can carry consequences that are not obvious on the surface. No shots were fired. No public statement was needed. But the message came through with complete clarity. In modern naval operations, the most decisive moments are often the quietest ones. Long after the Venezuelan ships had slipped into the background of the surface picture, the carrier strike group stayed on its assigned course. There was no celebratory formation, no visible change in posture, only disciplined routine, flight schedules maintained, watch teams rotated, and sensors continuing to scan a sea that is always in motion. From the outside, it seemed as though nothing unusual had taken place. Inside the command spaces, however, the encounter was already being turned into something far more valuable: a lesson set, a reference point, a future template. By early evening, the strike group's collected data had been assembled into a single operational record. Radar tracks were matched with infrared imagery. Electronic emissions were cataloged by frequency range and pulse pattern. Timestamps linked every course change down to the second. Nothing depended on guesswork. Everything rested on evidence. That is how modern naval encounters are truly judged. Not by who made the loudest signal, not by who moved in first, but by who stayed in control while the other side revealed more than it intended. The 6 Venezuelan warships had tried to apply pressure in international waters without clearly crossing a legal boundary. In the process, they exposed how they maneuver under strain, how they coordinate across multiple ships, and how quickly cohesion begins to weaken when events stop unfolding according to plan. Those are the kinds of lessons that do not disappear. Carrier strike groups are built to deter without rushing toward escalation. Their strength lies not only in aircraft and missiles, but in the consistency of their response. When a formation holds its course under pressure, it removes uncertainty from the situation. And uncertainty is often the one advantage a smaller force hopes to create. That advantage never appeared. Instead, the encounter underscored a reality that has shaped naval operations for decades. At sea, restraint backed by real capability can be more unsettling to an opponent than open aggression. It takes away their narrative, it takes away their justification, and it takes away the miscalculation they may have been trying to provoke. For the sailors involved, the event became one more entry in a long history of close passes and carefully measured decisions. No medals, no public spotlight. Just proof that training had translated into action. For analysts and planners ashore, it became something else, a case study. It showed how gray zone pressure develops in real time and how it can be neutralized without a single shot fired. It highlighted the value of layered awareness, disciplined command, and patience under pressure. Most of all, it reaffirmed that freedom of navigation is not defended through theatrics, but through consistency. The Carrier Strike Group did not turn away. It did not surge forward. It did not mirror the behavior around it. It simply continued. And that steady continuation carried more weight than any dramatic warning ever could. In the days that followed, there were no official statements from Caracas or Washington directly addressing the incident. None were necessary. The sea has a way of absorbing moments like this in silence. Ships move on. Tracks separate. The surface grows calm again, but the record remains. Every Navy understands that, whether it says so publicly or not. Encounters like this shape future behavior. They influence how far pressure can go, how close is considered too close, and how quickly that pressure falls apart when it meets disciplined resolve. The lesson from that afternoon in the Caribbean was not really about confrontation. It was about limits. 6 warships tried to interfere with the movement of a carrier strike group. They did not succeed, not because of a dramatic show of force, but because they misread the kind of strength they were facing. In the end, the most powerful response was not escalation, it was restraint, carried out with complete confidence. And at sea, confidence backed by capability remains the decisive edge.